Welcome to Universal Audiobooks, the space where big ideas meet everyday lives. Today, we're beginning a book that just might shift how you think about obstacles forever. This is A Beautiful Constraint by Adam Morgan and Mark Barden. Now, what's this book really about? At its core, it's about something we all face: limitations. Not having enough time, not having enough money, not having the team, the tech, the resources, or the answers. In those moments, most of us react the same way. We pull back, we scale down. We say, we can't because, but what if those very constraints, the things that feel like dead ends, were actually the spark for your next breakthrough? That's the promise of this book. It shows us how to transform limitations into advantages. It gives us real tools and real stories of people, creatives, entrepreneurs, teachers, leaders, who did more with less, not in spite of their constraints, but because of them. Now let's meet the minds behind the book. Adam Morgan is the founder of a consultancy called Eat Big Fish, and he's best known for his work on challenger brands, companies that disrupt their industries by thinking differently. Mark Barden is a partner at the same firm. He works closely with innovators, helping them turn business problems into creative momentum. Together, they've worked with brands like Nike, Unilever, and Google. But this book, it isn't just for businesses. It's for anyone facing limits, which is, let's be honest, all of us. So what can you expect by listening to this book? Over the next 11 chapters, you'll discover how to shift from a victim mindset to a transformer mindset, how to ask better questions that spark bold ideas, how to lead teams through constraints, and how to use emotion, creativity, and even scarcity as superpowers. You'll learn not just how to get around constraints, but how to make them part of your success story. So whether you're an entrepreneur starting with nothing, a leader navigating uncertainty, or just someone trying to build something meaningful with limited time or tools, this book is for you. Because A Beautiful Constraint doesn't promise a life without limitations. It promises something better, a way to thrive within them. So if you're ready, let's begin the journey. Let's dive into Chapter 1 of A Beautiful Constraint by Adam Morgan and Mark Barden. And let me tell you, this chapter doesn't just start the book, it starts a mindset revolution. So let's talk about what happens when we hit a wall. You know that feeling, when a new project, goal, or idea collides with a hard limitation? Maybe it's budget, time, resources, or maybe it's self-doubt. This chapter introduces us to three mindsets that we typically adopt when faced with constraints: the victim, the neutralizer, and the transformer. Now picture this. You're asked to double your team's results with half the budget. The victim says, "This isn't fair, it's impossible." The neutralizer says, "Fine, I'll make it work, but we'll have to scale down expectations." And the transformer? The transformer says, "Interesting, what can we do with this constraint?" This mindset shift from limitation to Launchpad is what the entire book is about. The authors argue that we often start in victim mode, where the constraint feels like a dead end. But with some reflection, and sometimes necessity, we move into neutralizer mode, finding workarounds just to get the job done. But it's when we become a transformer, someone who embraces the constraint, that the real magic happens. They share examples like how Airbnb was born out of financial pressure, with two guys renting air mattresses in their apartment because they couldn't afford rent. A constraint forced creativity, and that creativity sparked an empire. Adam Morgan and Mark Barden want us to realize something very powerful. Constraints don't kill ambition, they clarify it, they ignite it. So how do you shift your mindset? Start by recognizing the voice in your head when a challenge appears. Are you defaulting to defeat, or are you curious? Ask yourself, what could this limitation be teaching me? Because every great innovator, from Edison to Elon, has faced constraints. And the ones who transformed the world did so not in spite of them, but because of them. So as you finish Chapter 1, ask yourself, am I being a victim of my constraints, just neutralizing them, or transforming them into something beautiful? This is just the beginning. Stick around as we dive deeper into the next chapters of this powerful book. I'm your host, and this is Universal Audiobooks, where limitations become launching points. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with someone who's ready to transform their limits into their legacy. Let's turn the page and step into Chapter 2, Breaking Path Dependence. Now in Chapter 2 of A Beautiful Constraint is all about the habits and mental models that keep us stuck even when we want to change. Let's talk about something called path dependence. Sounds technical, right? But trust me, it's personal. Path dependence is when we keep doing things a certain way, just because that's how we've always done them. It's like when you open PowerPoint for a creative brainstorm, not because it's the best tool, but because it's what you know. We've all been there. The authors argue that past success becomes a trap. The longer you've done something one way, the harder it is to imagine doing it differently, especially under constraint. So what do? They introduce the concept of deliberate detachment, a mental process of stepping back, questioning routines, and asking, what assumptions am I making? Is this the only way to get this done? They even suggest auditing your language. For example, if your team constantly says we have to, or we can't because, it's probably a red flag. That's not strategy, that's habit in disguise. This chapter invites us to interrupt the autopilot, to break the mold. Let's say you're working with a tight budget. The path-dependent mind says, well, we can't shoot video because we can't afford a film crew. But the transformer mindset might say, wait, can we crowdsource content? Can we partner with a film student? Could we try animation? It's not about being reckless. It's about being open. Another example the book shares, a major airline revisited their assumptions about boarding procedures. By breaking their traditional flow, they found a new method that cut down loading time significantly. A constraint turned into a performance gain. So here's your challenge after Chapter 2. Identify one area in your life or work where you're acting out of routine. Then ask, what if I started from scratch today? Would I do it the same way? This chapter reminds us, the future doesn't live on the well-trodden path. Sometimes we have to break the old path to walk a new one. Let's step deeper. Into Chapter 3, Ask Propelling Questions. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever heard a question so powerful it made you stop in your tracks? That's what this chapter is all about. Not just asking questions, but asking the right ones. The kind that unlock innovation, even when you're backed into a corner. The authors introduce us to a game-changing idea, the propelling question. A propelling question is a special kind of challenge. It combines a bold ambition with a severe constraint, and in doing so, it forces us to think in completely new ways. Here's an example from the book. How can we double the number of customers we serve with half the resources? That's not just a problem. That's a propeller. It pushes your mind forward, beyond the boundaries of conventional thinking. You see, when we ask average questions, we get average answers. But when we ask impossible but intriguing questions, our brains start making unexpected connections. The authors talk about how Nike once asked, how can we turn sustainability from a cost into a competitive advantage? Boom! That question drove innovation across their entire design process, leading to new materials, processes, and brand stories. You know what makes a propelling question so effective? It doesn't allow compromise. It insists on a new approach. It stretches your creativity. Propelling questions work because they change the game you're playing. Instead of choosing between two trade-offs, you reframe the situation entirely. So how do you craft your own? Here's a simple framework from the chapter. Start with an ambition. Add a meaningful constraint. Frame it as a challenge to be solved, not a problem to be escaped. Try this in your own world. How can I grow my business owner without increasing my marketing budget? How can I spend more time with my kids without sacrificing productivity? These kinds of questions make you shift gears. And that's the point. Chapter takeaway: a great question is like a slingshot. It may feel like tension at first, but it's designed to launch you further than you thought possible. You're listening to Universal Audiobooks, where we believe that curiosity, not certainty, creates the future. Now that was Chapter 3. Let's unlock the door to Chapter 4, the can-if method. Let me ask you something. What's your first reaction when you're faced with a challenge? Most of us say, we can't do that because... And just like that, the door slams shut. But this chapter introduces us to a radically different response. We can do that if. It's called the can-if method, and it's one of the most powerful mindset tools in the entire book. Here's how it works. Instead of shutting down ideas because of a constraint, you reframe them with possibility. You turn every can't into a can-if. Let's break it down. Say your company wants to launch a new product, but your team says, we can't do it because we don't have the budget. Pause right there. Now reframe it. We can do it if we find a low-cost production partner. We can do it if we launch a smaller MVP first. We can do it if we crowdsource part of the development. Boom. Now you're cooking with creativity. The authors make it clear. The can-if approach doesn't just remove excuses. It creates momentum. And here's the best part. It's collaborative. They share stories of teams using sticky notes to come up with dozens of can-if solutions in real time. Everyone contributes. Everyone shifts from problem finders to possibility creators. Let me share one example. A chocolate company wanted to make eco-friendly packaging, but couldn't afford new materials. So they said, we can go sustainable if we partner with a recycling startup that needs brand visibility. That one sentence led to a partnership that cut costs and built their brand as a green innovator. So what can you do with this method? Start by listening to how often you or your team default to can't because. Then flip the script. Write down 5 can-if alternatives. Don't overthink, just experiment. You'll be amazed at how fast possibility returns. The big takeaway from Chapter 4, constraints don't need to block you. They just need a creative if. It's not about ignoring reality, it's about reshaping it. You're listening to Universal Audiobooks, where we turn impossible into innovative. Now let's open a new door. It's time for Chapter 5, Creating Abundance. Trust me, it's a mind-opener. If this series has sparked something in you, be sure to like, subscribe, and share it with someone building something from scratch. Let's talk about one of the most powerful illusions we all fall into: scarcity. We think we don't have enough. Not enough time, not enough budget, not enough talent, people, reach, ideas. And so we scale down our ambition to match our resources. But here's the twist from Adam Morgan and Mark Barden. What if you don't need more resources? Just better ways to see and use what you already have. This chapter is about creating abundance from scarcity, not by magically generating more, but by getting more creative with what's already there. Let me share a story that captures this beautifully. There was a rural school with no internet, no tech, and barely enough textbooks. But they had one asset: motivated students with old mobile phones. So the teachers said, we can go digital if we turn those phones into a learning network. They texted quiz questions to the kids replied in groups. Suddenly, a resource everyone thought was too basic became the key to learning transformation. Here's the truth. Abundance is a mindset. The authors talk about how resourcefulness beats resources. It's about repurposing what looks like waste. It's about finding value in places others ignore. They give the example of a hotel that wanted to attract more guests but didn't have the money to upgrade rooms. So they turned their hallways into mini art galleries by partnering with local artists. No budget, big impact. That's abundance. Here's a powerful question they suggest asking. What assets do we already have that we're not fully using? Is it an underutilized email list? An old idea sitting in a drawer? Connections you haven't called in a while? Another technique in this chapter is resource redefinition. Taking something ordinary and giving it new meaning. Don't have a full production team? Maybe your interns become your street team. Don't have a studio? Maybe your living room becomes the storytelling space your audience connects with most. So here's the challenge from Chapter 5. Stop looking at what you lack. Start rethinking what you have. The real power isn't in having more. It's in doing more with less and doing it brilliantly. It's time for Chapter 6, Activating Emotions. In this one, it'll hit you in the heart. Remember to like, subscribe, and share with someone who's chasing a goal and could use a little fire in their belly. Now, it's time we talk about emotion, not just as a feeling, but as fuel. You see, many of us think transformation happens through logic, analysis, planning, and sure, those are important. But this chapter argues that the real driver of change, the thing that makes people go further, push harder, and rise from failure, is emotion. Let me ask you this. When was the last time you were so frustrated, so excited, or so fired up that you couldn't sleep until you acted on it? That's the emotional energy the authors are talking about. In Chapter 6 of A Beautiful Constraint, Morgan and Barden explore how feelings like urgency, frustration, ambition, even anger can be the ignition point for reinvention. Think about movements that changed the world. They didn't start with spreadsheets, they started with emotion. So when it comes to embracing constraints, the real question is, how deeply do you care about solving this? In fact, the chapter shares examples of leaders and entrepreneurs who used emotions strategically to power through limitations. They didn't run from constraints, they ran because of them. One story is about a nonprofit founder who was so angry about inequality in school access, she built a national platform with almost no funding, just sheer emotional will. Her frustration became focus. Her pain became power. And here's the key insight. Constraints without emotion feel like prison walls. But constraints with emotion? They feel like a mission. That's why this chapter challenges us to dig into our emotional core. Ask yourself, what problem makes you furious or frustrated enough to want change? What dream lights you up so much you'd pursue it, even if the odds are stacked? What fear would you willingly face for something that matters more? The authors encourage using emotional anchoring, tying your goals to values, beliefs, stories, and stakes that actually matter to you. Because when it gets hard, and it will, emotion is what keeps you in the game. So what is the takeaway from Chapter 6? 1. Don't suppress your emotions when facing constraints. 2. Activate them, use them, let them guide your innovation. And now we're almost there. Coming up next, let's move to next Chapter 7. The Fertile Zero, what it means to start from absolutely nothing and still rise. We now arrive at Chapter 7, The Fertile Zero. If you've been moved by these lessons so far, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who needs to hear that zero isn't the end, it's the beginning. Let's talk about one of the scariest places to be. Zero. Zero resources, zero budget, zero experience, zero connections. Most people fear zero because it feels like nothing, a void, a dead end. But Chapter 7 flips that fear on its head and asks us to see zero not as barren, but as fertile, a place where new things can be planted without the clutter, the noise, or the baggage of how it's always been done. Hence the name, The Fertile Zero. Adam Morgan and Mark Barden tell the story of people who started at rock bottom, not as victims of scarcity, but as creators of possibility. Take the Wright brothers. No formal engineering training, no big funding. Just vision, persistence, and a bicycle shop. Their zero was fertile because it forced them to look where no one else was looking. Another great example, startups born in garages. They had no staff, no office space, no safety net, but those constraints demanded innovation. The lesson here is this. Sometimes when you have nothing, you're free to imagine anything. You see, having no options can be liberating. You aren't tied to legacy systems. You don't have to fight tradition. You're free to try, fail, iterate, learn, and grow faster than someone weighed down by too many choices or expectations. So how do we make the most of the fertile zero? The authors suggest a few mindset shifts. 1. Reframe zero as clean space, a blank canvas. 2. Focus on resourcefulness instead of resources. 3. Lean into experimentation. Move fast, test ideas, and learn by doing. They even talk about the gift of constraint. When you don't have much, your creativity becomes sharp, your ideas become leaner, and your why becomes even more important. Let me ask you this. Have you ever done something incredible because you had nothing else to fall back on? Maybe it was your first business, your side hustle, your passion project. Remember how alive that felt? That's the fertile zero. It's not about lacking, it's about launching. So next time you find yourself with nothing, remind yourself, zero might be where the real story starts. This is Universal Audiobooks, where emptiness becomes energy and blank slates become breakthroughs. Coming up next, Chapter 8, Constraint-Driven Cultures. We're going from individuals to organizations. If you've made it this far, You're part of a growing movement of minds that don't shrink from limitations. We transform them. So go ahead, like, subscribe, and share this episode with someone leading a team or shaping a culture. Because this chapter, it's for leaders. Now let's zoom out. So far, we've talked about how individuals respond to constraints, but what happens when we scale that mindset into an entire organization? That's what Chapter 8 is all about, building a constraint-driven culture. Here's the truth. Most organizations are built to protect against constraint. They seek predictability, stability, control. But as Morgan and Barden point out, the most innovative organizations do the opposite. They bake constraint into their DNA. They give their teams guardrails, not highways. They create rules that push instead of policies that protect. Let me explain. A constraint-driven culture is one where limitations are not excuses. They're invitation letters to innovation. Google once ran an internal program where teams had to build entire product ideas using just 2 people. No more, no less. The constraint, tiny team. The outcome, creative velocity. They stripped away bloated processes and forced rapid experimentation. Pixar limits every movie's runtime to keep storytelling tight. IKEA limits materials to reduce cost and increase sustainability. These aren't accidents. They're strategic constraints that spark better thinking. But how do you build that kind of culture? The authors offer a few guiding principles. 1. Make constraint part of the brief, not just the reality. Challenge teams up front with how might we questions under tight limits. 2. Reward problem solving under pressure, not just big results. Celebrate the how, not just the what. 3. Create space for experimentation. A culture that accepts failure as learning, not loss. They also emphasize the importance of psychological safety. A culture where it's okay to admit, I don't know, or let's try this instead. Because constraint-driven thinking only works when teams feel empowered to be wrong on the way to being brilliant. So whether you're running a startup or leading a classroom, the question is, are we designing our environment to unlock creative thinking or to avoid discomfort? The takeaway from Chapter 8, constraints aren't just useful for individuals. They're essential for organizations that want to stay agile, curious, and courageous. ABS. Coming up next, Chapter 9, Scarcity and Abundance. And trust me, it's not what you think. Today's chapter is big. It's about the tension we all feel between what we don't have and what we wish we did. That tension has a name: scarcity. When you hear that word, what do you think of? Empty shelves, tight deadlines, missing tools? Scarcity feels small, closed, tight. But here's the twist from Chapter 9. Scarcity and abundance are both mindsets, not just conditions. Let me say that again. They are not just about what you have. They're about how you see what you have. This chapter explores how some people and organizations thrive under the same limitations that crush others. Why? Because they've trained themselves to see abundance inside of scarcity. Let's take a moment to unpack that. Scarcity mindset says, we don't have enough, we're stuck. Let's lower expectations. Abundance mindset says, we may not have everything, but what can we create with what we do have? Morgan and Barden talk about how scarcity is often external, but abundance must be internal. They give the example of an advertising agency that challenged its teams to create entire campaigns with no traditional media spend. Guess what happened? The ideas got better, sharper, more human. They used storytelling, partnerships, community. Things money can't always buy. Scarcity led to strategy. But this isn't about magical thinking or fake positivity. The book is clear. It's not about pretending you have more than you do. It's about reframing your reality in a way that makes you resourceful, not resentful. One of the best insights in this chapter: scarcity sharpens focus. It removes the clutter and forces you to ask, what actually matters? It makes you prioritize. It makes you creative. And abundance? It's not just about more money or more tools. It's about more belief, more curiosity, more collaboration. So here's your reflection from Chapter 9. Where in your life are you waiting for more before you move forward? And what if you started anyway, with less? What would that unlock? The big message? You don't need more to begin. You just need to believe that more can come once you start. And this is Universal Audiobooks, where scarcity is just a spark, and you are the flame. In the next chapter, let's learn how to make limitations. Art. Chapter 10. Making Constraints Beautiful. Let's continue the journey. Welcome to Chapter 10 of A Beautiful Constraint, Making Constraints Beautiful. Here on Universal Audiobooks, we've talked a lot about reframing limits, asking better questions, and building bold ideas with less. But this chapter, it goes even further. It asks us not just to accept constraints, not just to work with them, but to make them beautiful. What does that mean? Think of it this way. Beauty isn't just about aesthetics. It's about elegance in design, purpose in limitation, harmony in the challenge itself. In this chapter, Adam Morgan and Mark Barden explore how some of the most impactful innovations in the world didn't just overcome constraints, they celebrated them. Let's take an example from the design world. Have you ever noticed how Instagram filters, back in the early days, only offered a limited set of options? That wasn't a bug. That was by design. The constraint of fewer choices led users to take quicker, more confident actions. It wasn't frustrating. It was freeing. The constraint was, in fact, part of the experience. That's what this chapter is about. Building systems, experiences, and solutions where the constraint becomes the signature. Let's make it practical. Instead of asking, how can we work around this limitation? We ask, how can we design something so good that the limitation becomes the reason it works? This is where form follows constraint, where the boundaries of what's possible shape the beauty of the outcome. The authors talk about creative industries where limits are often misunderstood as restrictions. But for the best creators, constraint is the brief. A short deadline becomes the reason for a bold idea. A budget cap leads to storytelling with heart instead of effects. A physical limitation forces simplicity, and simplicity becomes timeless. Making constraints beautiful means going from functional problem-solving to intentional design. And this doesn't just apply to products, it applies to life. Think about relationships, parenting, career moves. We often wish for more time, more money, more space. But what if the very limits we resist are what shape our best selves? Here's the shift in mindset, from "we managed in spite of" to "we succeeded because of." That's beauty. So what's the takeaway from Chapter 10? Don't just use constraints, own them, elevate them, design with them in mind. Make the constraint part of the solution's identity. Because when you do that, you don't just survive the challenge. You build something that couldn't exist without it. In the next chapter, let's talk about the role of leadership in keeping this mindset alive and making it contagious. Chapter 11, Leadership in the Future of Constraints. Chapter 11 is called Leadership in the Future of Constraints, and it's the perfect closing message. Because here's the truth. Everything we've explored so far, turning limitations into possibilities, reframing questions, using scarcity to fuel creativity, none of it sticks unless someone leads the way. This chapter is not just for CEOs or executives. It's for anyone, yes, even you, who takes ownership of how things move forward in a team, a family, a classroom, or a community. So let's begin with this idea. The role of a leader in a world full of constraints is to model the mindset that says, we are not here to fight constraints. We're here to grow through them. Leaders set the emotional tone. If a leader sees a budget cut and reacts with panic, so will the team. But if the leader asks, what can we do with this? Suddenly the team is curious, not afraid. Leadership is about protecting the space where constraints turn into creativity. The authors highlight one powerful habit of constraint-driven leaders. They deliberately introduce constraints to spark new thinking. That's right. Great leaders don't wait for limitations to show up. They create purposeful ones. For example, they might say, what if we could only use 5 slides to pitch this? What if we had to launch this in 30 days? What if we built this with 0 external help? The goal isn't to make life harder. It's to make thinking sharper, teams more agile, and solutions more elegant. Another thing great leaders do, they make constraint a shared mindset, not a personal burden. They involve others in the reframing. They encourage teams to ask can-if questions and reward ideas that come from resourcefulness, not just from resources. And maybe most importantly, They lead with optimism. They don't pretend constraints don't exist, but they choose to believe that limits don't have to mean loss. They can mean leverage. This chapter also looks ahead to the kind of world we're building. We're entering an age where constraints will become the norm, not the exception. Environmental limits, time shortages, economic pressures, global challenges, which means constraint-driven thinking is not just helpful. It's necessary. It's the new leadership skill, the new literacy, the new superpower. So here's the final takeaway from Chapter 11. Whether you're leading one person or 1,000, your ability to inspire others through limitation will define your impact in the years to come. Thank you for being part of this audio journey through a beautiful constraint. This is Universal Audiobooks, and we hope this series didn't just inform you, it transformed you. If it did, help us keep spreading the message by liking, subscribing, and sharing this with the next bold thinker in your life. Until next time, lead with vision, create with constraint, and keep asking, what can we do with what we already have? And now, as we wrap up this powerful journey through a beautiful constraint, let's take a moment to reflect, not just on what we read, but what we've learned. This book began with a simple question. What if the things we think are holding us back are actually the very things that can push us forward? From that single idea, we traveled through 11 chapters, each one offering tools, mindsets, and stories that prove something incredible. Constraints are not the enemy. They are the spark. We learned that there are 3 ways to respond to constraint: as a victim, a neutralizer, or a transformer. And we discovered that becoming a transformer isn't about waiting for the perfect conditions. It's about learning to create brilliance under pressure. We challenged our path-dependent thinking, asking, is this the only way to do it? And we learned to reframe limitations with propelling questions, questions that demand breakthrough thinking. Then came the can-if method, one of the most powerful mindset shifts in the book. Not we can't because, but we can if. We learned that abundance is a mindset, not a material measurement, and that even when we start from zero, that space can be fertile if we use it well. We saw how emotions, especially frustration, passion, and urgency, are not distractions. They are engines. We saw that teams and entire organizations can be built around constraint. Cultures that don't fear limitations, but bake them into the creative process. And finally, we discovered that the future belongs to those who lead differently. Leaders who don't just manage around limits, they design with them. They make constraint beautiful. So what's the big idea behind a beautiful constraint? It's this. Every limitation you face, whether it's time, money, support, or skill, carries within it an invitation to grow, to rethink, to solve in ways no one else has, to build something that wouldn't be possible without that very constraint. That's the real beauty. So the next time you hear, we don't have enough, you'll know how to respond. Because you've walked through this book, and now you know you don't need more. You need to think differently about what you already have. This is Universal Audiobooks, and this has been a beautiful constraint. If this series inspired you, share it. If it challenged you, re-listen. And if it changed the way you think, let it shape the way you lead, create, and live. We'll see you in the next book.